Have you ever wondered what people in the ancient world really did behind closed doors? Not the sanitized versions found in school books, but the real practices, rituals, and beliefs that shaped love, sex, and intimacy thousands of years ago? Welcome to our channel, where we peel back the curtain on the hidden history of sexuality, where desire meets tradition, and where long-buried secrets still manage to shock us today. And tonight we are diving into the heart of the Persian Empire, a civilization that stretched from the Mediterranean all the way to India, and whose people had traditions so surprising, so provocative, that they will leave you wondering how such customs could have ever existed. What you think you know about Persia is only half the story. The grand palaces, the battles, the kings draped in gold. Yes, those existed. But beneath the surface were practices that blended religion, pleasure, politics, and taboo into one strange, intoxicating mix. Imagine for a moment the fire temples of Zoroastrian priests, glowing in the desert night. The flames were sacred, eternal, symbols of purity. But now imagine that those same priests were guardians of sexual rituals that today would cause outrage and confusion. For Persians, sexuality wasn't something tucked away in shame. It was woven into the spiritual and social fabric of life. In fact, Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion of ancient Persia, saw procreation not just as a duty, but as a holy act, one that expanded the forces of good against the darkness of evil. Every child born was a victory in this cosmic struggle, and so marriage, fertility, and even unusual sexual customs became extensions of divine law. But what shocks us most is how far some of these customs went. Take the practice of close-kin marriage, for example. Yes, marrying within the family. Not just cousins, which has been common in many cultures, but even siblings and parents. To us, the thought is horrifying. Yet in Persia, it was considered one of the most sacred forms of union. The term was sweatada, and far from being taboo, it was praised by priests as the ultimate bond, a merging of bloodlines so pure that it pleased the gods themselves. Texts from the Avesta, the Zoroastrian holy book, describe this act as one of the most meritorious deeds a believer could perform. To a Persian priest, marrying your sister was not corruption. It was cosmic harmony. Of course, this wasn't just about religion. Politics and power played their part. Royal families saw such unions as a way to protect dynastic bloodlines, to keep the throne within their own flesh and blood. Imagine kings and queens, worshipped as semi-divine, legitimizing their rule not just with armies and palaces, but with marriages that today we would find unthinkable. Yet for Persians of that era, it was celebrated. A union of brother and sister wasn't a scandal. It was an act of piety and pride. And it didn't stop there. Sexuality in Persia often blended with ritualistic purity. There were rules about how often couples should sleep together, how children were to be conceived, and even which sexual positions were encouraged or discouraged. For instance, intercourse during menstruation was considered a grave sin, not because of health reasons, but because blood was seen as a force of impurity, tied to evil spirits. Every sexual act was measured against cosmic balance, either strengthening the forces of light or empowering the demons of darkness. Pleasure wasn't separate from religion. It was a battlefield. What makes this even more fascinating is how Persians viewed women. Unlike in many other ancient societies, Persian women, at least those of noble status, were given unusual levels of power. Royal women could own land, command armies, and even oversee provinces. But in their private lives, women were expected to carry the heavy burden of ensuring lineage and ritual purity. Virginity was not just prized, it was spiritual currency. A girl's first sexual experience wasn't simply personal, it was cosmic. In some traditions, temple authorities oversaw marriages and consummations, ensuring that no evil spirits interfered with the sacred act. And then there's the darker side. Some scholars suggest that in certain temples, young women were compelled into ritual sex as an offering to the gods. Whether voluntary or enforced, the practice blurred the lines between devotion and exploitation. To Persians, offering your body to the divine flame was an honor. To us, it raises troubling questions about consent, power, and faith. Persian clothing covered the body fully. Women wore veils long before Islam arrived, and men dressed in layered robes. On the outside, the culture seemed conservative, restrained. Yet beneath that fabric lay a system of beliefs where sex wasn't merely tolerated, but infused with divine meaning, where unions we'd label incestuous were lauded as holy, and where the act of intimacy itself was a weapon in the eternal war between light and darkness. Now, this is only the beginning. The surface of Persia's sexual traditions reveals enough to shock us. But when we go deeper into the world of ritual, magic, and politics, we find customs even stranger. The Persians were not merely passionate, they were inventive, creating practices that would blur morality and mysticism. And as we journey into these hidden corners, the lines between devotion, pleasure, and power become almost impossible to separate. As Persia expanded into the world, its traditions spread like wildfire, carried by soldiers, merchants, and priests. What shocks us most is how these sexual customs, so tied to their religion and politics, did not stay confined to their empire. They seeped into Greece, India, and even Rome, sparking fascination, revulsion, and imitation. The Greeks, for instance, were appalled by Persian incestuous marriages, yet at the same time, some aristocrats whispered enviously about how such unions kept dynasties strong. Philosophers like Herodotus wrote about these customs with both horror and curiosity, unable to decide whether Persia was savage or simply bold in ways Greece could never be. India, too, absorbed Persian influences. Zoroastrian refugees who fled after the empire's decline carried with them fragments of their sexual cosmology, which blended into local traditions. Some scholars argue that rituals in early tantric practices echo Persian ideas about semen as sacred fire and the timing of intercourse as a spiritual act. Imagine how ideas born in the deserts of Persia may have helped shape the mystical sexuality of South Asia, giving rise to traditions that still intrigue the world today. Even Rome, despite its decadent reputation, looked at Persia with a mix of fear and fascination. Roman writers mocked Persian harems as decadent prisons, yet their own emperors adopted similar practices of keeping vast entourages of women. Roman soldiers returning from campaigns in the East brought home stories of magical amulets, protective spells, and the belief that sex could alter destiny. Slowly, whispers of Persian magic found their way into Roman bedrooms. But the most lasting influence came from Zoroastrianism itself. When Islam arose centuries later, it absorbed and reinterpreted many Persian customs. The veiling of women, often assumed to be purely Islamic, had deep Persian roots. The idea of sexual purity as tied to cosmic battle shaped early Islamic thought, even as it rejected practices like incestuous marriage. Persia's legacy became woven into the moral and spiritual codes that still shape much of the Middle East today. What lingers in all this is the duality. Persians treated sex as both sacred and dangerous, a source of immense power, but also of immense risk. And perhaps that is why their traditions shock us, because they force us to confront the possibility that what we considered taboo is not universal. It shifts across time, across culture, across faith. Imagine living in a world where marrying your sister made you holy, where spilling semen wrongly doomed your soul, where pleasure was also magic, and where every act in bed was a step in a cosmic war. As shocking as these customs may be, they remind us of something profound. Sexuality has always been more than biology. It is a mirror of our deepest fears, our wildest hopes, and our endless struggle to control forces bigger than ourselves. The Persians, with their fires and their demons, their harems and their charms, lived this truth in ways both awe-inspiring and unsettling. And now, as we reach the end of our journey into ancient Persian traditions, the question falls to you. Which of these customs shocked you the most? Was it the sanctified incest, the cosmic role of semen, the magical timing of conception, or the political webs of the harem? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing which parts of history make you pause, laugh, or shudder, because sometimes the past is far stranger than anything we could imagine today. As we peel back another layer of Persia's secret traditions, we move into a world where sexuality became not just a private act, but a tool of power and sorcery. Imagine a culture where love spells weren't whispered charms, but carefully crafted rituals involving bodily fluids, sacred fires and invocations to unseen forces. In Persia, sex wasn't only about pleasure or procreation. It was also about control, over the body, over fate, even over empires. Take, for instance, the rituals tied to semen. To Zoroastrians, semen was a sacred substance, a spark of divine fire. The act of ejaculation was not trivial. It was the release of cosmic power. Priests taught that spilling semen in the wrong way, such as through masturbation or with a non-procreative partner, fed demons instead of the divine. But within the correct ritual framework, semen was a weapon against evil. There are accounts suggesting that some priests even collected it in ritual contexts, seeing it as a literal form of spiritual energy. Imagine how differently we would view sexuality if we believed every drop of fluid carried cosmic weight. Persians also practiced complex fertility rituals. Some involved sleeping in special sanctuaries where couples would lie together under sacred symbols, their union believed to guarantee divine blessing for children. Others involved invoking deities of water and earth before intercourse, asking the elements themselves to participate in conception. There were whispers of magical brews, mixtures of herbs and oils meant to heighten desire or ensure fertility. Some contained ingredients that today we'd consider toxic, but at the time, they were believed to bridge the human and the divine. And then there were the royal courts, where sex often became political theater. Persian kings, surrounded by vast harems, wielded sexual access as a tool of loyalty and control. A harem wasn't just a place of pleasure, it was a political machine, filled with women from noble families across the empire. By binding these women to him, the king symbolically bound their families as well. The women themselves lived in a world of both luxury and confinement, their bodies instruments of diplomacy, their status determined by their intimacy with the ruler. But even within these gilded cages, there were layers of intrigue. Eunuchs, castrated men, served as guardians of the harem. Their presence reveals another shocking Persian custom: the deliberate control of male sexuality through castration. Eunuchs were trusted because their sexual capacity was believed to be erased, but paradoxically, they wielded enormous influence. They managed affairs, carried messages, and in many cases became power brokers within the empire. Their status reminds us that sexuality in Persia wasn't only about desire. It was about who controlled it, and for what purpose. Magic also seeped into daily intimacy. Amulets were worn to protect lovers from curses, and charms were buried beneath beds to ward off infertility. Some rituals demanded couples abstain from sex for specific lunar cycles, believing that timing intercourse with the moon's phases determined the child's destiny. A baby conceived at full moon, they believed, would grow into a strong warrior. One conceived in the darkness of the new moon might be plagued by illness or misfortune. Imagine the pressure of not just making love, but making it at exactly the right cosmic moment. And while religion gave sexuality a sacred aura, it also enforced fear. There were demons, known as daivas, believed to lurk in the shadows, eager to corrupt intimacy. Couples were taught to recite prayers before sex, guarding themselves from these forces. Some even believed that a jealous spirit could cause impotence or miscarriage. In a society where sex was cosmic, failure in bed wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. It meant the demons had won a small victory. One of the most disturbing traditions tied to these beliefs was ritualized exposure of young girls to temple authorities, where their purity was examined, and in some cases, their first intercourse overseen by priests. To the faithful, this was protection, ensuring evil could not taint the sacred moment. To us, it feels more like institutionalized control over women's bodies, a merging of religion and sexuality that robs agency in the name of holiness. And yet, Persians also celebrated sex in ways that sound surprisingly modern. Banquets sometimes ended with drinking games that carried a sexual edge, where nobles might test each other's stamina or indulge in playful flirtations. Behind the rigid codes, there was an undercurrent of pleasure-seeking, a reminder that humans, even in the most spiritual of frameworks, find ways to turn sex into joy. So, in Persia, the bed was never just a bed. It was a battlefield of demons, a tool of kings, a stage for magic, and a cosmic arena where fluids, timing, and bloodlines shaped destiny itself. And as we shift to the next layer of this story, the shocking element grows even stranger, because Persia's sexual traditions weren't just about themselves. They influenced the world around them, spreading into neighboring cultures, seeding customs that would echo through history.